The church exists for nothing else but to draw men into Christ, to make them little Christs. If they're not doing that, all the cathedrals, clergy, missions, sermons, even the Bible itself, are simply a waste of time. God became man for no other purpose.
This is Mission 66, based on the teaching ministry of Bible teacher and pastor Dr. Luis Sayao and produced by TWR. Today, we explore the book of Judges, stories of courage, God's faithfulness, and the consequences of turning from Him. Let's hear from our teacher, John Matthews, and co-host Esther Sisulu as they guide us through these timeless lessons on obedience, leadership, and relying on God, even in the midst of chaos.
After an incredible journey through the book of Judges, our series today concludes with chapters 19 through to 21. Now, the genius Albert Einstein once said, "Only two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity," and I'm not sure about the first one. Well, indeed, without God, evil is a bottomless pit. And in today's episode, our teacher John Matthews will present the theme, Descent into Madness.
Esther, thank you so much. Great to be with you, as always, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66, wherever you are today. We're so glad that you're here with us right now. You know, there is no doubt that we live in a world where, sadly, terrible things are done by human beings to other human beings. Kind of crimes that we hear about may cause us to wonder, whatever next? How much further into depravity can the human race descend? Well, as we go through the book of Judges in the Old Testament, we see this same thing. Each chapter seems to describe an even more debased situation than the one before it. And so by the time we reach the last three chapters, we may be shocked at what we come across. The text begins in chapter 19, and we're going to read it, of course, exactly as it is. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Now, a concubine was a wife who wasn't really a wife in the full sense of the word, so she may bear children to this man, but had no legal claim to property or indeed any of the rights of a wife. And the man would be called a husband, but he wasn't really a husband in the true sense of the word. And so what you have here is something that simply wasn't God's design for marriage. But remember, we're in this period of the Judges when people had just become used to doing whatever they wanted, to doing as they pleased. And so having concubines had become an accepted practice. Verse 2 says, "And this man's concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the 4th day they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, 'Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go.' So the two of them sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, 'Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry.' And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart, and the girl's father again said, "Strengthen your heart and wait until the day declines." So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Oh, behold, now the day has waned toward evening. Please spend the night, and behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here, and let your heart be merry. Tomorrow you can arise early in the morning for your journey and go home." The Levites then set out on a journey to return to Ephraim, and along the way they seek a place to stay. As they pass through Gibeah, later to be known as Jerusalem, they decide not to stop there, saying, "Let's not stay in a city of the Canaanites. Let's look for an Israelite city." And so they choose Gibeah, a city that would later be associated with King Saul. And arriving in Gibeah, they find nobody offering any hospitality. And so they're exposed. There they are, sitting in the town square. And eventually an old man from the hill country of Ephraim living in Gibeah notices them and invites them to stay at his house. And he provides them with bread and wine, but also with a grave warning to them not to spend the night in the square. You know what? Ironically, they would probably have been saved for staying in the Canaanite city. This old man knew something about Gibeah that the Levite did not know, and his dire warning turns out to be very appropriate. This is verse 22. "And as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, 'Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him.'" Now, they're not talking here about wanting to be introduced to the Levite. This word know is the same meaning as the word know when Adam knew his wife Eve, and so it explicitly means sexual contact. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do with them what seems good to you, but against this man do not do this outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. You see, where the Lord is not king and where the word of God is thrown so far aside and there's no civil government that keeps law and order, the people here cast off all restraint. Verse 27. "And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, 'Get up, let us be going.' But there was no answer. And then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, sending her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, 'Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. When the rest of Israel then learned of the atrocity, they gathered in one accord before the Lord in Mizpah. 400,000 armed soldiers from across Israel gathered together to address this horrific crime. And that is what chapter 20 describes. Paraphrasing that chapter, the Levite recounts the entire story of what had just happened and explains that he had sent, inexplicably, he explains the unexplainable, that he had sent pieces of his concubine's body through Israel. And enraged, the tribes of Israel demanded that the Benjamites surrender the wicked men of Gibeah. But the Benjamites refused to do this. Instead, they strap on their swords. They prepare for war against all the other tribes of Israel. And so the ensuing conflict is heart-wrenching, with the Israelites seeking guidance from God, who seems to say, go up against them. Judah will lead the attack. And at the first attack, Israel is beaten back with heavy losses. They try again and again. They're turned away with heavy losses, and then with tears, the Israelites ask God whether they should try a third time, and the answer is, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. Ultimately, the Israelites set a trap, an ambush, drawing the Benjamites out of the city, but they're surrounded, and the entire tribe of Benjamin is decimated. 25,000 Benjamites, all valiant soldiers, fall. 600 of their men flee to the wilderness, and they stay at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. As the Israelites, they go back to the towns of Benjamin, they put them all to the sword, men, animals, and everything else that they find, and all the towns they come across they set on fire. And there is this descent into madness, murdering entire populations. And the tragedy doesn't end there, because in the last chapter of Judges we see and read that the Israelites realize too late they've nearly wiped out an entire tribe of Israel. So all the other tribes mourn deeply at what had happened, and they cry these tears of remorse because of the horrific damage that had been done, but it cannot be reversed. Nevertheless, they use human reasoning, and they devise some kind of plan to ensure the survival of Benjamin. And the plan was this, chapter 21, verse 19. So they said, behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebonah. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give to them. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we'll say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. They raided the vineyards of Shiloh, captured girls who came to their ceremonial harvest dances, and carried them back as captives. These they gave as wives for the remaining Benjamite men. And so this distasteful account demonstrates the catastrophic consequences of people who turn away from God's guidance. And the book of Judges is a 21 chapter long, really testimonial of what happens when people discard God's authority and everyone just does as they see fit. Some people, might even call this some kind of utopia, a utopian society with no moral guidelines to curb wrongdoing, assuming that all the people would act ultimately virtuously, as if they're under the assumption that mankind is born perfect. But mankind is not born perfect. Mankind is born with sin deeply embedded in his DNA. And only the Spirit of God can deliver the old man into a new rebirth. And the reality here, Esther, is a sober one. And it's no different today, no different whatsoever. And that is that human nature left to itself will descend without God into a downward spiral.
This is Mission 66. I'm Esther, and after reading those few chapters of Judges, I think we have some questions that need answering, John. And I don't know about you, but to some extent I was kind of hoping that Judges would have a much happier ending, but it just seemed that things devolved from one level of bad to the next.
Yeah, it does. Esther, it really does. And better times will come further along in the Bible when we get to the prophet Samuel, for example, who's actually the author of Judges and is considered by many to be the last of the judges. And after Samuel, well, then comes the kings of Israel, beginning with King Saul. But in reality, we so often learn far, far more from the things that go wrong in society. Look, we can personalize that to say we learn more from the mistakes we make in our lives than ever we do from our success. And if we are willing to let failure and pain teach us, we can learn wisdom that teaches us our limitations, our weaknesses, our need of God, and the constant availability of a God who will give us so much more than we could imagine. And here we see a society that has turned its back on God and the descent into unspeakable actions. Ultimately, though, we learn that life is not about us. It never was. Do we learn the lessons of history? Failure teaches us who we really are, and it has the potential to refine our character into something of beauty, something that is authentic, not defended or stuck in that hopeless and endless state of trying to please ourselves or indeed other people. Judges, is helpful in that it serves as a stark reminder that when God says something that is for our good, it really is for our good. And so here he says, don't befriend or get involved with the Canaanites. Why? It's for great reason, because he knows that if that happens, what we've just read in Judges 21 will be the outcome. And we've seen through Judges multiple examples of where this leads to. The Israelites, well, they stop taking God seriously. They allow many of the Baal worshippers to remain in the land. Sure enough, the Israelites begin worshipping false gods. And then in Judges, things have reached this point where the Israelites are as immoral as those around them. There's no differentiation, in some cases worse. Can you hear God saying, didn't I tell you? They needed to be driven out. Didn't I warn you not to intermarry and adopt their practices? But Judges is instructive for another reason too, and that's the need for order in society, for authority. When everybody does what seems right in their own eyes, it doesn't work. Society needs direction. Society needs divine direction.
Something that I think, John, that is quite ironic with this story is that the Levite thought that he'd be safer with his own people, but it actually turns out that he would have been safer with the Canaanite towns or in the Canaanite towns. And going back to what you said, the Israelites embraced this Baal worship and in fact took it to another level. They were far worse in how they behaved.
Yeah, it's a good point, Esther. And it's true, the Israelites, supposedly the people of God, well, they'd now sunk to where they were no better. And you mentioned the word irony, and it is ironic, and that irony exists today just as much in some places. And it reminds us that being part of God's church, well, that doesn't make us right with God. It might make us religious, might even make us judgmental, at which point we're a little different from those Pharisees who Jesus condemned for the way that they oppressed others. So that irony is something that we see today as well, you know?
And I suppose just to reiterate, we're not putting down or diminishing the need for us to go to church. It's important that we go to church, right, John?
Yeah, really important, Esther, because that's where we worship collectively and we get instruction and we interact with people of God. And nobody was ever meant to be an island all by themselves. You know, if we try to go it alone, we're a little bit like a coal that's removed from the heat of the fire. The truth is we will soon grow cold without the warmth of true spirit-filled fellowship. But let me make this point, and make no mistake about this. The Christian life is not primarily about the church. It's about Jesus Christ. The church is a conduit to make us more like Jesus. C.S. Lewis, we've mentioned him before on Mission 66. I think he grasped this really well when he said, the church exists for nothing else but to draw men to Jesus. Or Christ is the word he used, to make them like little Christs. If the church is not doing that, all the cathedrals, clergy, missions, sermons, even the Bible itself, are simply a waste of time. God became man for no other purpose. So the point is very clear. It is all about Jesus Christ. And if the church doesn't make the people within its four walls more like Jesus, then the church is a waste of time.
Oh, those are some sobering words, but true nonetheless. Here's one for you, John. This is now the account where the Israelites asked God whether they should go fight against the tribe of Benjamin because, of that great offense that happened against the concubine. But what we see here is that they had to attack them 3 times. So why do you think that God allowed them to lose the first 2 times?
Yeah, God says, doesn't he, that they should go to battle against Benjamin, but he never promises them that they're going to win the first, or as you say, even the second time. Why did he allow that, carnage, I suppose, in those 2 attempts? Well, look, we can't be sure, but God knows what he's doing. And so it's possible that God is teaching these people that there is a price to be paid for casting his word aside. And that's what we see writ large throughout the book of Judges. Israel seems to have abandoned their call to be God's lighthouse in the promised land. And in abandoning that greatest calling, there is fallout.
Now, a place that was mentioned quite often in these chapters was Gibeah. Is there anything special about Gibeah in the general history of Israel?
Well, good question, because there's actually a direct connection between Gibeah, the tribe of Benjamin, and the family of Saul, who becomes Israel's first king. We're going to get to that when we reach the prophet Samuel. Now, this King Saul, he begins successfully. It's quite a story that we'll get to, but his actions then eventually show that his heart really is a long way from God, which ultimately leads to his downfall. And so God will demonstrate that he alone chooses the one who will reign over his people. But all of that is coming in future episodes of Mission 66.
Well, thanks for that, John. And you know what, always, thank you so much for your insights. You really give us some valuable things to think about. And perhaps you can now point us to some pertinent things that we can take from these chapters that we've read and kind of conclude them in our summary today.
Yeah, let's do that, Esther. Well, look, today we reach the end of the book of Judges, which is this 300-year period in the history of Israel when there's no chain of authority, no leadership, and so everybody begins doing things their own way. And the book of Judges, it teaches us that sinful mankind left to their own devices will descend deeper into trouble and sadness as they drift further away from God. And I wonder what your situation is in your life right now as you're listening to us here at Mission 66. Do you do only what feels good to you? I wonder whether you decide for yourself what's good and bad and follow your own course with no thought about what God says about it. Perhaps you feel a little bit like a ship being blown around by any old wind that comes your way, but ultimately without an anchor holding you to the solid rock of Christ. Perhaps we're in reality adrift on a sea of madness. But you know what happens when you're in that sea? There is a light that beams with warmth and love into that sea, and it bids you to come to safety. There is a way for mankind to avoid those eternal rocks of destruction. There is a way for man to rise to that sublime abode, talking about heaven. And that way is Jesus, an incredible offering, his incredible sacrifice, our Holy Spirit's energies, an advocate with God. So come now, regardless of the chaos that may define your life and may have defined your life, your background, your family, your generation, come now to him, because his arms are open wide.
What an invitation to come to Jesus. And friend, I hope you will come to him today. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mission 66 as we conclude the book of Judges. And hey, we're looking forward to joining you next time as we take on the book of Ruth. So until then, this is Mission 66.
As Mission 66 comes to a close, be sure to download your free study guide at mission66.org. Deepen your daily devotion with insights from each episode, and let John and Esther lead you through the scriptures. Get your study guide at mission66.org and be prepared for our next episode. There, you can also connect with us, ask questions, or donate to help Mission 66's worldwide outreach. Head to mission66.org. Mission 66 is made possible through Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.